Okay, so we're back to my guitar again, and I said I would produce a video on the whole of this fan fret thing here, which I've promised a few people over the months that I would do. And before I get into this, there were a couple of things I forgot about before when I looked at this guitar, which you might be interested in. One of them I'll deal with in a bit, but if you look there at the top of the guitar, there's a hole. A sound hole. Now, those people that scour luthier forums will know a lot about these, but there are two talking points whenever I take this guitar out on the road. One is that, and the other one is this. And the idea of this is quite simple. It gives you a feel for the sound that's been projected forward. I think all of us have had the experience where somebody's picked up our guitar and played it, and you listen to it, you think, wow, that sounds really good. And that might be because the guitar player is really good, but also it's because, the sound is, it sounds better from out front. So that's like having a little personal monitor. I think it works, it's great. Some people, your luthiers use them, some don't. Some have used them and now have stopped, but I really like that. So, moving on to the fan fret, which is the point of this. Now, lots of people ask about it because it seems a bit wacky. In fact, some people tell me they couldn't consider buying one because it just offends them too much. The design there is just wrong. I suspect they're the kind of people that keep their underwear drawers really tidy, but there you go. But there's a purpose for this. Now, I'm told by people who know more about this than I do that it's not a radically new idea. I think some Polish luthier tried to patent this some years ago, but I'm told this idea goes back to the Renaissance. And the basic idea is that if you're using lower tunings than standard, you get more tension on the bass strings, and I'll come to that in a minute. It's always worth recognising that this thing of standard tuning is relatively new. In the early days of the guitar design or the evolution of what we now consider to be the modern day guitar, there was no such thing as standard tuning. People produced instruments with different courses of strings, with different scale lengths and different tunings to fit into the style of music that people were playing at the time. There was no standard. So the notion of different scale lengths and of even multi-scale lengths here is not new. I would call that a fan fret, but some of my more pedantic, picky friends don't like that term. They call this a multi-scale neck. So the best way I can explain this to you is to just talk you through what I wanted. So this guitar, as I've already said, was commissioned predominantly to play in lower tunings, alternate tunings. I use quite a few C tunings, G suspended fourth tunings. The highest this ever goes to is Dagad. It has been in standard tuning once, which I was at the acoustic soundboard weekend in Halifax, and some bounder put my guitar in standard tuning, but I've never used it in standard tuning. These tunings I've played for my own pleasure or for instrumental pieces for 25, 30 years, maybe even a bit longer. But until about 5 years ago, I hadn't really used them for accompanying singing or playing live. I went to see Martin Simpson at one of his workshops, and during those 3 days or so, you see him play the guitar a lot. And I realised that his use of these alternative tunings gave him more variety as a solo performer. So if you think about playing a solo set, you'll probably play each tune in a different key to the predecessor, which means using the capo. I used to use standard tuning and dropped D a lot. Sometimes I would drop the top D as well, and sometimes I would use an open D, but predominantly standard and drop D. And it did mean the picking patterns were very similar all the time. So as a result of the Simpson workshop, I went back and I thought, well, maybe I can adapt the stuff that I sing for these kind of tunings, and maybe it will give me a bit more variety when I play. And that's what I did. And I don't know if it helps with audiences, but it certainly makes me feel that there's a bit more variety there. But there was a problem. So I've got two other guitars. One is a Santa Cruz OM model, orchestra model. A very good copy of the Martin originals. And the other is a Martin J40. Now these both have OM scales, which are fine. So if I'm using a C tuning, capoed at the 2nd fret, so I'm playing in D, that was great. If I took the capo off and tried to play the same arrangements in C, I felt the bass strings were a bit flabby. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you, go to YouTube and have a look at a video of Martin Carthy, the great English player. He plays on a shorter scale Martin 000 guitar, and he often plays in C tuning, and to my ears the bass strings often sound a bit kind of limp, a bit kind of, I don't know, flabby. Now that's fine for him because that's his style, his tuning, and he's an absolute genius. I didn't want my guitars to sound like that, but I did want to find some open tunings that I could sing easily in C with. So I didn't feel comfortable playing those C tunings on my guitars. So I wanted something that had a greater string tension here. So this guitar, the first string is OM length, so it's the same length as my other two guitars. What's that? I don't know, 60 millimeters or 25 point something inches, and the bass scale is obviously longer. Now you don't have to use a fan fret to get that extra tension. Some luthiers build D guitars, they're usually called, which are guitars that are designed to be played in lower tunings, and the scale length will be longer here. So you're approaching what you might do with a baritone guitar. So a baritone guitar classically will be tuned B or A flat, even A, and it'll probably have the same body dimensions, but it will be a longer scale, so it gives you that extra tension to play those lower notes. There's two, I think, difficulties with extending the scale for all the notes, so it's just like this but longer. I might be being picky, but this is just me. The first is that as you lengthen the scale, you get more tension on the bass string, but you also change the tone of the first, second strings, the top strings, if you like. And some people say the tone gets slightly harsher, brighter as you move up. So one of the thinking behind the fan fret is that you're able to combine the sweeter tone of a shorter scale length with the greater tension on the bass strings, if that makes sense. Quite a lot of people will build so that first string there is a kind of shorter length Gibson type scale, which has a sweet tone. But I was quite happy with my OM tone, and this first string never goes above D on this guitar, so I was quite happy with that length there. So some people would prefer this because they want to get the tension here, but they don't want to lose the tone there. Okay, we're talking about very fine considerations, but if you're commissioning your own purpose-built guitar, you can do that. The second thing, and probably more significant for me, is that if I was extending this scale length here, it's okay sitting down, although it pushes out a bit, but I play a lot standing to accompany my singing, and the distances seem more pronounced when I do that. Playing an open C tuning without a capo is fine here, but you're stretching it a bit. If I put another inch on that, I think I'd notice that, and it wouldn't be as comfortable. And as we get older, the comfort and the ergonomics of the guitar, I think, become more and more important. When we're younger, it's great to play for 2-hour sessions, and you like to do that as you get older, but the aches and pains creep in. Another consideration of fan frets against them really are stretches. I was talking to Michael Watts, a fabulous fingerstyle guitar player, a couple of years ago, and asked him why he didn't consider a fan fret, or did he consider a fan fret when he commissioned his latest guitar. Now, he plays a lot in dadgad, and sometimes the stretches in dadgad are a bit much, so that's a classic stretch for me in one of my tunes. That's almost undoable on this. If I'm playing in the second fret, the stretch is there, and it's more pronounced, but so it's less pronounced, but it's still a stretch. And Michael said to me that playing a lot in dadgad, he just thought some of the stretches might be just a bit too big for him. I'm not sure whether he plays in the C tunings. I'm not sure he does, but one of the characteristics of those, if you checked out my introduction to alternate tunings videos, is that the C tunings tend to not have the stretch that dadgad does. So, things to consider, the tuning that you're going to be using, whether you want to be able to play in without a capo or not, or whether you want to try and minimize the length of that extra scale there, is all up to you. People have different ways of looking at it. There's a guitar player, I think he's called Ben Smith, plays with Jossian Clark. Somebody will be along to contradict me in a minute. He has, I think, a filed made baritone, but he uses fan frets on that, and I think what that does, it allows him to get the tension here for the baritone, but to minimise the scale length there. At least I guess that's what he's doing. So that's what a fan fret does for me. It adds that tension on the bass. It's not too radical in terms of scale length, and it preserves comfort. After I commissioned this guitar, I then began to do some research on the whole fan fret thing. And perhaps I should have done it the other way around, but there's a whole science and debate about that angle there and how great it should be. I've mentioned that some people use a shorter scale than I do here. The contemporary fingerstyle player Andy McKee has a really dramatic angle here. I think that's something to do with all that tapping he does up there, something. Presumably gives him a bit more tension or a bit more percussive style, I don't know, I'm guessing about that. And the other thing that's interesting about them is there's a debate about how you arrange the frets. So here, and this is a classic fan fret thing, there's one fret in the middle of the fretboard that is conventionally aligned, so it's at right angles to the edge of the fingerboard. I think this is the 7th or the 8th fret. So you'll notice that the frets here fan that way and the frets here fan that way. There's a debate about where you put that single fret and then work from there. And some people will arrange the whole thing differently. So at this end of the guitar looks more conventional, but the scale length changes more at the top here. So you get a sharper angle here and sharper angle frets there. I don't know. All I can say is I'm very comfortable with this. People will say, well, actually, are they hard to play? I mean, things are in a different position. The reality as you play is you don't notice. So, oops. Now what I'm doing there is what I always do. So I'm looking to fret just at the back of the fret, very much just behind it. So you get a cleaner sound from the fret, and you need less effort to do that. And I'm still doing that as I go across the fretboard. And you're just aiming for that. And in all honesty, you don't notice at all. It doesn't make a big difference. It might make a difference if you were I don't know, playing some kind of ragtime stuff, and you were kind of conventionally using your thumb over the neck like that. That's a slightly bigger stretch. So I don't think you'd use this if you were predominantly playing that kind of style of music, but no doubt somebody will pop up and say that they do. So again, that's about the stretching. And because this is used for Celtic style music, the width there, and the general width of the fingerboard is going to be a little bit too much for some people. Particularly those people who've got the small hands. So there's a lot of space in there to move in. One of the things I think about fan frets, and I wondered if it was just me for a while, is that as you're playing those kind of scaly ones, there seems to me to be almost more room here in some of the frets than there is on a conventional guitar, because you actually got more distance, if you think about it, there on the top strings than you would have. But I'd never heard anybody refer to that until about a year ago. I read an interview with somebody on the Acoustic Guitar magazine who said he thought that as well. So yeah, if you're playing this style of guitar, that's not only good for the string tension here, but I think it's very comfortable as well. So I think that's covered, everything in terms of my understanding of what it means to play. You won't see these on conventional manufactured guitars anytime soon, for a number of different reasons. First of all, the bracing has to change to take into account that neck, bridge alignment. And you'll notice if you look carefully at this bridge, it's not symmetrical, and that's something to do with the design as well. So the bracing has to be different, and of course you know, I can go in and say, look, I want this kind of fanfret dimension. The next person comes in and wants something more dramatic, then that changes the bracing again. So it's unlikely that you'll find an easy standard shaping for this. I think avian guitars, who are designed by some North American luthiers and produced in the Far East, I think they have a fanfret standard in their line. Loudon do as well. The Loudon fanfret is always the same, I think, if you buy one. It's a sharper angle, I think, than this. It's a very expensive guitar for what it is, I think. You know, almost overpriced. So I think this is a custom guitar feature. And if you're going to the trouble of commissioning a custom built guitar, using these tunings is something you might want to consider. Some of the boutique manufacturers use them. Brook, who makes stunning custom guitars in their own right, will give you a fanfret if they want. I think Andy and Simon there consider them to be gimmicks, but they're wrong. I don't think they're gimmicks at all. It all depends on the style of music that you play. So have a look around. Some luthiers will offer fanfrets or multi-scale instruments as a matter of course. Files do them. Some luthiers, like Adrian had never made one of these before, but was very keen to have a go, and I trusted his luthier skills to do that quite happily. I met Adrian a few weeks ago, and he told me he just had his second commissioned. So I said to him, well, you know, how does that work then? What kind of, you know, scale length are they using? And he said, well, they're going to be using much the same scale length that I've got here. Dave White from the Acoustic Soundboard, who runs DeFriesche guitars, I think that's how you pronounce it. He uses a lot of multi-scales, or he's very comfortable using them, in different scale dimensions. But not all luthiers do. I don't think I've ever seen one from Stefan Sobel, for example, or something like that. So, if you're interested in this and you want to know a bit more, put a note in a comment under the video, or a comment on the forum that you've seen the video posted, and I'll try and deal with that. But no doubt there'll be some luthier along to or other players to explain things in a little bit more depth. It's a custom feature. It's not just a gimmick in my view. For me, it's quite a practical set of considerations. Because I was commissioning my own guitar, I thought, yeah, okay, let's do that. Let's have a bit of fun with it as well. And all I can say, it works. When I commissioned this guitar, I thought this would stay at home. And but actually, I use it for almost everything now. It gigs out an awful lot. Because I'm playing naturally in those tunings now, and I don't have any problems with it. So I think it's an interesting feature. It's a practical solution for some people in some conditions, not everybody. But if you want to know more about it, drop me a line, or if you're talking to a luthier and you're kind of vaguely interested, have a conversation with them about it and see what they think. Anyway, thanks for listening. Hope that helps.